All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials World podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? We love metal. I love metal way more than you do. I'm kidding, but we love metal, right? But, we talk about obviously very influential metal albums. We talk about influences to metal. And I've been thinking a lot about the influences to a lot of modern metal, right? You have everything from Sonny and Cher to Captain and Tennille. You have, of course, 80s Beach Boys specifically. But a band that a lot of people don't talk about when it comes to influences on modern metal, and I know, Brian, you've never heard of this band. They're called Acid Bath.
Oh yeah, I don't. I said who is that? Like, what's that? Like a psych rock band?
No, it's actually a band out of Louisiana that released two albums in the 90s, and then they just mysteriously broke up one day and nobody knows why. So this week, I think we should review their first album, which is an album that I know you've never heard of, but I've been a fan of for 20 years. So I think this week we should review When the Kite String Pops by Acid Bath. And I'm kidding, Brian, this was your idea for the episode. But this is an album that I had heard about many, many times from you. And I finally listened to it. And you know what, Brian? I get it. This is a great fucking album. Before we even get to our cringe millennial moment, this is a great fucking album.
I'm glad to hear that. This is probably my favorite metal album ever, which isn't to say I think it's the best or anything like that. There's a lot of metal I like a lot. And I'd been into metal I think I was 17 when I heard this. So I like all the classic metal and most big names. I liked Iron Maiden and I loved Black Sabbath and all that shit. And I think around the time I was getting into this, obviously I was really into hardcore punk and I was getting probably into grindcore too around that time. And something about this specific album, it's such a weird brew because it's it's extreme metal. It is in the extreme bracket. There's elements of black metal here, there's elements of death metal. Lyrically, I would say more than anywhere else, this is a pretty extreme album. But there's also this weird brew of kind of quasi mysticism and psychedelic stuff. There's a lot of David Bowie and Lynyrd Skynyrd influence on this album. I was the right type of kid, which is to say I was weird and maybe a little pretentious, where it hit me in exactly the right way. And I still have yet to find another metal album that I connect with in quite the way I connect with this one. Very excited to talk about it, especially because revisiting it lately in the context of the show, it really is indicative of the time it came out in a really weird way. Whatever was going on in kind of extreme music in kind of the mid 90s, there's some element of it kind of cross-pollinates here, which is a little interesting.
Exactly. And, before we get into our album this week, Brian, of course, we got to bring back our segment, the cringe generational millennial moment of the motherfucking week. Woo! Yeah! And before, of course, we get into this extremely influential album, we have to talk about this because, Brian, you dropped a hint of what this is, and I have no idea what the fuck this moment is going to be. I'm going to be honest with you.
I'm so excited. We're going to talk about Threaten. Since we're talking about, modern metal, heavy music, let me just set the stage for a little bit. In 2018, a band called Threaten had booked a pretty small, independent tour in several mid-level clubs around the UK. Well, all of the dates sold out. These are mid-level clubs, but this independent band sold at every show, a couple hundred tickets. Medium-sized venues, 300 tickets. And the promoters kind of are thinking well, I don't know this band, but it's an independent band. Obviously, there's a thriving ecosystem, especially in independent rock and roll, of bands with followings that aren't famous, right? This band starts playing shows and nobody's at them. The first couple of shows, the venue owners are saying, this is really weird, this is really disappointing, and people kind of feel bad for the band, right? And then this keeps happening. And venues start talking to the frontman of the band, the lead guitarist and vocalist, Jared Threatin, Threatin, very metal. And he goes, I don't know, it's crazy. It must be something wrong with the people we promoted him with. And his bandmates, who he hired specifically for this tour, it's like a for-hire band, because Threatin in the studio is a one-man band. Jared does it all right. They're kind of like, this is really weird. You said that, you're a big artist. What's going on? And Jared's like, I don't know. This is crazy, man. And venue owners start making posts about it, saying hey, I think this guy is fucking with us. Venue owners start making the band pay him out of pocket after their gigs because they were promised 300 people in their building and 4 showed up. Eventually, the 4 higher members of the band see this post and they go, Jared, what's going on? People are saying weird stuff about you. We got a dip. I should also point out that Jared paid these musicians $300 to come on this tour. He paid for their plane tickets. He did not pay for their food. He did not pay for their hotel rooms, and he paid them $300. And of course, they did it because he presented himself as an accomplished, independent rock musician with a following and career. people start looking into Jared Threaten and the Threaten Project, and it's fake. It's all a fucking work. He has bought a significant social media following on all platforms. He went so far as to create a management company to say managed him. He created fake band names that he said that entertainment team managed. He created fake reviews. He created fake live performances that apparently they must have been somewhat well edited, where he took footage from like stadium shows and edited it cleverly to make it look like it was a Threaten concert.
Wow. This shit's crazy. I've never heard this fucking story. I'm genuinely shocked. This is the first time I've heard about it.
Me too, man. Okay, there isn't a whole lot more to say. That's what Threaten is. But when these things start coming out, Jared's brother, who he'd previously been in some kind of a black metal band with, said like, hey, I just want to make a public statement because Jared's not going to do the right thing. And I'm going to say like, hey, I'm really embarrassed by my brother's actions. I haven't seen him in years. He dipped out on our family. He and I were in a band together. And what he said is, this is the type of thing Jared would do. He's like a big narcissist and he's very selfish and he wants to make it in the music industry. And his brother said what he's going to do is now pretend that it was all some sort of elaborate gimmick thing and that he intentionally did all this. And that's exactly what Jared did. Jared made a post after all this news starts breaking where he said, what is fake news? I turned an empty room into a front page news article. If you are reading this, you are part of the illusion.
You know what this sounds like, Brian? This sounds like Corey Feldman. The joke's on you.
But Corey seems like a nice guy with like some sort of, like, I don't know if he's nice, but like he seems enthusiastic about what he's doing, right?
Yeah.
Here's the thing. So Threaten, you gotta listen to their music. It's the most mediocre shit. He's a pretty competent musician. He can play drums, he can play bass. He's a pretty solid metal guitarist on a technical level. The music is so boring. And it's got the flattest production I've ever heard. It's hard to describe because it's so bland. He has like very 2000s rock vocal, kind of post-hardcore-y pop punk thing, but he's clearly like aiming for metal, right? And it's just very flat. His breakout single from his debut album, Breaking the World, is called Living is Dying. It's crazy to me, I guess, that the music could be so bland and uninspired, because this guy clearly had so much inspiration to fake all this, right? To make this up. And then you listen to his music, and it's like, I mean, it just sounds like if you were watching like a CW show and there was like a high school metal band in it, that's what the band would sound like.
Sounds like one of those Disney Channel rock bands.
Kind of, actually. So the story doesn't quite end there. Jared tries to do the puppet master move, right? Tries to spin it. Nobody buys it. Jared's ex-bandmates, who, again, he only hired for the tour. They were maybe the primary victims of this in some ways, you know? They say like, hey, I'm sorry about this. They also talk about how the fact that they were involved with Jared now has made it hard for him to continue to get work as like session musicians. Jared puts out his album 2017. This tour happens 2018. 2019, Jared launches a comeback show at one of the clubs in London that he scammed. I think it was in London. It's somewhere in the UK. But this time he makes it a big gimmick. He comes out on stage and he does sell about, I think, 60 tickets. Legitimately. It's not tickets he bought himself like previous. Most of them are music journalists or other types of journalists. But Jared comes out with a bunch of mannequins around him that are wearing shirts that say fake band. He has backing tracks playing, and sometimes he like hand the microphone, quote unquote, hand the microphone to the mannequin so they can sing. He's trying to be cute with it, right? And at one point, and this is very strange to me, someone brings out like a stagehand or someone brings out a blow-up doll of like a blonde woman who has the phrase BBC written on her chest. And Jared simulates the blow-up doll performing oral sex on him at this show. Not really sure what that's supposed to mean. I guess he probably thinks he's making some sort of edgy satirical statement, but I don't know. This show goes on for about 45 minutes, which is a pretty short show for an artist with the whole album out. By the end of the show, there were, I think, 5 people left in the audience. So even of these music journalists who came out to watch this fucking train wreck, they all left before the end of the show. After that, Jared disappeared. I think that was his last attempt to pivot into real stardom from this. Hopefully he will come back, because he says he has a documentary in the works and a new album. Something about this guy, he was born in 1989, by the way, is very millennial coded to me. Not the music he makes, but just also the weird kind of narcissism and addiction to posting. Like, I couldn't see it being any other generation. And I thought, we're going to be talking about one certain type of metal auteur this episode. Why not pair him with another?
Yes. My God, what a fucking wild story. And, talk about metal auteurs, right, Brian? I think that leads perfectly into our album. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
So just get into the details real quick before we get into the track listing. And oh my God, these Amazon reviews, Brian, the shittiest Amazon reviews you've ever seen. But before we get into that, let's get into some quick details. So this album came out in 1994. It is performed, of course, by the band Acid Bath. The personnel includes Dax Rigg on vocals, and Dax Riggs is like basically the face of the band at this point, right? Like, was he the reason that they got back together, right? Am I wrong about that?
Probably not.
Probably
really not. So there's a lot of lore here. Dax was like the big holdout. So Dax has had a variety of projects since Acid Bath broke, and for the last several years has been doing solo albums, right? He's kind of the guy that brought the weirder into Acid Bath. Like, let's say their guitarist Sammy held down the kind of the metal end. But throughout the 2000s and most like the 2010s, in interviews that I saw, people would ask Dax, well, was there ever going to be an Acid Bath reunion? And he would say, no, not interested. And then after a while, he started telling people when they asked him, he's like, there can't be an Acid Bath reunion because I can't do the harsh vocals anymore. Like, I've literally lost the ability to do them.
No, totally fair. You mentioned Mike Sanchez, so he was on guitar, and then Sammy here duet on backing vocals and guitar, and R.I.P. the bassist of this band, Audrey Petrie, who was actually the reason the band broke up because he died. Him and his parents died in a drunk driving accident. Not he was drunk, but a drunk driver killed him.
I think his kid brother was also in the car, and he was the lone survivor.
Yeah, and I'd read, and I don't know if this is true or not, but the guy who got into the drunk driving accident with them died a couple years ago due to another drunk driving accident, which wouldn't surprise me.
Sucks. Yeah, that's a fucking drag.
And then Jimmy Kyle on drums. Now, I find that really interesting, right? Because Jimmy Kyle is, if you're not familiar... Oh, never mind. I'm thinking of somebody else named Jimmy, or somebody else Kyle or whatever. There's this, like, really trashy, like, fucking Maury-esque figure in the UK by the name of Jeremy Kyle. Jeremy Kyle, that's it.
It'd be awesome if that guy played drums in Acid Bath.
Yeah. And then this album was produced by Spike Cassidy, Greg Troiner, and the band Acid Bath themselves. This album is 69 minutes. Nice. Long. I'm going to be honest with you, even before we get to the track listing here, I love this album. Like, every track on here is at least good to great to amazing, but I think this album is just way too long. I'm going to be honest with you. I really do. Listen, if this was a split album, I'd be like, perfect, but it's too long. I'm sorry.
Fair. So typically, I'm on record agreeing with you about lengths of films and records. Because this band works for me so well, it doesn't bother me, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, honestly, if they had split this up into, like, I mean, even two LPs, because you could do that, because LPs are 30 plus minutes long. So if they did that, like...
Two 35-minute...
Yeah, totally, 100%. But the way that it is totally fine. For me, just a little too long. Just a little bit too long, in my opinion. But it's still
fair.
Good. Still good. Still good. And, well, speaking of things that aren't fair or good, this was released on Rotten Records, and I think we should rename this record label to Rotten Cunt record label.
Rotten Company. Rotten Company. Business.
But legit, though, Rotten Records seems like some rotten piece of shit. They seem awful. They seem spiteful and just horrible. That's what they seem like.
So I think to get ahead of it, this album has a pretty iconic cover that is pretty divisive that apparently Acid Bath did not like, and they were forced to use by Rotten Records.
Well, I also love the quote that they had, which is like, in America, you should be able to do what you want. And it's like, that's not how freedom of speech works. I'm sorry.
It's not about freedom. But also, according to the band, they didn't let them do what they want. They forced them to have this album cover, which, like, I don't care one way or the other, you know? It doesn't offend me. But I am curious to see what album art the band would have chosen, you know?
No, 100%. But yeah, we'll certainly get to that very, very, very shortly because it's actually the focus of one of the Amazon reviews. But before we get onto that, let's just say, speaking of Amazon, because it's relevant here, it has a 4.8 out of 5 on Amazon, and on Rate Your Music, it has a 3.92 out of 5, which made it the 15th highest ranked album from 1994 and was almost in the top 500 best albums of all time on Rate Your Music, which I believe is the highest ranked thing we've ever covered. I think maybe Jane Doe and maybe Firestorm is ahead of this, but I know for a fact this is in the top 3 for sure. So people love this album a lot, and very clearly they do, because every time Rotten Records takes down a YouTube rip of this album, it comes up like a day later.
Oh, no, there's a whole community of people who, because it's out of print, it's not just that they don't want it online, which you don't want your shit on YouTube or whatever, you know, or on, you know, if you don't want file sharing and you're a record company, that I get, they won't reissue it.
That's such a shit thing to do, because they probably make so much money.
The people like Acid Bath are a serious cult band. It seems to stem from the band publicly not getting along while they were on their label. Beyond that, I can't really figure out what it would be.
Just pettiness, 30 years after the fact, just pettiness.
Burning money to spite them. It does seem like, so as far as I can tell, on the official Acid Bath Spotify page, they do now have a merch section, which has listings for pre-orders for vinyl copies of the Kite String Pops and Pagan Terrorism Tactics. So seems like Rotten is finally prepping for a slew of reissues, probably because of the, recently announced reunion for Sick New World. Which, by the way, the day that happened, I looked at my phone and I had 3 messages from 3 different people telling me Acid Bath are getting back together. And I thought, there's no fucking way that's true.
I was one of them, I think, right? Because I saw that.
Yeah,
I'm like, wait, Acid Bath are getting back together.
Yep, you and 2 other people. I went to like a lunch break. So the first thing I saw, and I still had to double check because, I think the metal community, the idea of an Acid Bath reunion almost seemed like a Smiths reunion.
Oh, yeah, or like original Beatles reunion, and they bring back 2 of the members who died, or so it'd be like Resurrection or something.
Because, so the 3 main guys in Acid Bath are Audie, Sam, and Dax. With Audie's death, Sam and Dax has basically been doing like singer-songwriter, like kind of gloomy, like Mark Bolan influenced glam rock for the last like 12 years. Whereas Sammy is in a pretty well-known black metal band called Goat Whore.
Yeah, I thought it was Goat Whore. It was either Goat Whore or I Hate God. I knew it was one of those.
Yeah, it's Goat Whore. Goat Whore are probably the best American black metal band, in my opinion. They're pretty fucking good. Obviously pretty different from, like, say, a true Norwegian black metal band, but very good. But it just seemed like there was no reason for them to ever get back together. So that in itself pretty shocking. Hope we see some reissues and some new shit. Well, not new music, but hopefully it's, expanded into a tour so that I can finally see them. And hopefully we get those reissues from Rotten finally.
Hell fucking yeah. And you know what? Obviously, we just had a very enthusiastic mood. Let's bring down the mood a little bit because these Amazon reviews, man, we got to talk about them. These are insufferable cunts in these Amazon reviews. These are so bad. And they're short ones. To be clear, there were a lot of 5-star reviews and most of them were pretty good, pretty thoughtful, but they're going to go over a lot of the things we're going to talk about. So I didn't want to include any of them. But the negative reviews, Brian, are incredible. There's no way these aren't like 4chan shit posters or the dumbest motherfuckers alive. It has to be one of those 2 things. Like, it has to be like Moo people or whatever.
I think this is a Moo adjacent record. Like, it does have a 4chan audience.
Yeah, it's definitely not Mew core, but it's definitely Mew adjacent. I would 100% agree with that. So, but yeah, let's get into these fucking things real quick. So, Rich gives this 3 stars, and the head of the review says, that other guy is right. And I could not find this other guy, so I'll just have to go with what this motherfucker said. And the body of the review says, the singer does sound like the guy from Creed. And I'm like, no, he doesn't. What the fuck are you talking about?
No, okay, people do say, and I can't argue with it, that he shares mannerisms with that, like, not Creed, but like with Lane Staley or Chris Cornell. That's not how I think of Dax, but I can't argue with it, right? It's objectively kind of true.
Yeah. Oh, geez. But this one, I think, Brian, you might not like as much, or I should say maybe not even have some semblance of agreement with. So Donald J. Lebo gives this 2 stars. And the head of the review says, original? Uh-huh. And I'm just like, okay. And the body of the review says, I listen to this band and want to slip on some old swans for real music. This band frightening? A new metal listening wimp would think so. I don't even know what to fucking say about that. They are going to be at a new metal festival, so I guess, but I mean...
So that's one of the interesting things about this, re-listening to this for the podcast, is I've never thought of Acid Bath as a new metal band. But then they get announced on Sick New World, and then you kind of think of them and kind of like, I guess, where else would you slot them in? Because you can't really put them... Like, in their own day, they were kind of paired with black metal bands, but that's not really correct either,
No, yeah. And it just gets so much better. Personally, this sounds like swans with training wheels on. Get cop or filth public castration is a good idea for the real brutal, dark, and beautiful music. And the last sentence here, Brian, is incredible. Acid bath, more like acid reflux.
That's pretty good. So the thing with the Swans comparison that bothers me is, like, they're not that type of band. Like, Swans are like an avant-garde kind of like experimental band who are very dark. But Acid Bath are a metal band. That's like the difference. Acid Bath aren't trying to be like Swans. They aren't supposed to be on that level of like extremity. They're supposed to be like heavy. Right. That seems like a guy that works at a record store, judging my record as I'm paying for it.
Like I said, I really hope that's like a Mew guy, because if that's the case, he did a pretty good job of trolling. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah. The acid reflex thing is pretty good. I can't even hate.
Yeah. Well, speaking of a hater, Brian, we have one last hater here. So John J. Mexa gives us 1 star. And the head of the review says, Gacy clown copy of World's Worst Killer. And by the way, they put Gacy and they put like gay in there. And I'm like, is that supposed to be a burn on John Wayne Gacy?
Is that supposed to be like intentional? Because I mean,
That is
I
so
mean, what else
funny.
do you call it?
Yeah, it's like John Wayne Gacy. Yeah, more like gay.
You got him. Got his
Yeah,
ass.
he fucking got his ass. Jesus. To be fair, John Wayne Gacy might actually find that funny. To be honest with you, he might be like, "Yeah, I'm gay." He's just like,
Wasn't that his whole thing? Is that he would say that he killed F slurs that egged him on?
"Oh
Sorry, I
yeah."
don't mean to turn it into a bummer, but I think he did say that.
You probably did. But the body of this review is good. So why would you copy a copy? I'm like, okay, first,
It's
this person's illiterate. Why would you copy a copy of Wayne Gacy, quote unquote, the
no, it
worst
is
killer in the
by
world?
Gacy.
But first I was like, why would you copy a copy? Like, bro, what?
It's not a copy. That's the actual thing that Gacy drew or painted or whatever.
I love this one. Whoever got this drawing is not your friend. He may be a killer as well.
Thanks for the warning. Thanks for the heads up. I don't even understand.
This happened before any of you were born. This picture will cause people not to buy your albums or tickets to your concert. And by the way, Brian, this review was written like fucking 15 years after the band broke up,
Yeah.
so the concert thing wasn't really a problem.
They thought it was like some teenagers that made this. Well, so the thing with the John Wayne Gacy self-portrait that's on the album cover. Again, the band say they didn't like it. They didn't want to use it. Rotten Records foisted on them. And I am usually inclined to agree with them, but there are some things that make me question that. So one of which is their second album, Pagan Tourism Tactics, uses a piece of art by Jack Kevorkian. A much better, more interesting piece of art that I think is actually
from a much
really...
better person.
Yeah, exactly. I don't mean to compare the two. I agree with you. Pro Kevorkian podcast here.
Anti-Gacy.
Yeah, anti-Gacy, pro Kevorkian. I 100%. And also, it's a good piece of art that's kind of like edgy and kind of complements Acid Bath's music, especially on that second album where they get very psychedelic and kind of, you know. They also have an EP that was only released to radio shows called Radio Edits, where they use for the cover art a drawing by Richard Ramirez. So that seems to have been a theme. And they admit that they wanted to use the Kevorkian art, right? But it kind of seems like there are things, like there's a lot of like references in Acid Bath's lyrics to sex and violence and, you know, sexual violence, and kind of a lot of Dax Riggs' lyrics at this point are about kind of putting himself in the perspective of like a killer, a death drive kind of murderer. There's some bleak stuff on this album lyrically.
Well, speaking of, I think that leads perfectly into the track listing here, because talk about the fucking lyrics, and there's certainly some lyrics we will certainly highlight, of course.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
The opening track on here is The Blue, and you know, I don't know about you, but I always love albums that start off with guitar feedback. I just love it. I don't know why.
Yeah,
I think it works really well, especially for this kind of album.
Because it's like, and I had that same thought. I was like, oh, when the album starts off with some dissonant guitar noise like that, you're like, oh man, you know, they're telling you like the album hasn't even started yet, and it sounds buck wild.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, you talk obviously about the very morbid lyrics, right? I think this starts off on a pretty strong foot. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say so. And just, I guess, with Dax Riggs' lyrics, he really came out the gate, I would say, pretty fully formed as a songwriter. His lyrical style is kind of a hodgepodge of, there's like obviously horror literature influence, like he's like very influenced by like writers like Clive Barker and comic book writers like Alan Moore. There's kind of like a beatnik poetry thing. Some of his songs pretty clearly seem to have a narrative meaning, but a lot of it is kind of like, I feel like is almost kind of like words as texture, where it's more about the mood the words evoke rather than like what they literally mean. But I mean, there's also some very poetic phrases in this song, but it also includes the lines, eat my dead cock and eat my cold shit, which are pretty beautiful. But just to give you an idea, I guess, of Dax Riggs' deal is he's not necessarily, and even I think at this point, wasn't a metal guy. He would always say in interviews that he was into darkness or that he was into songwriting and not specifically metal. He's very into David Bowie. He still to this day is very into Bowie, and you can definitely hear it in his vocals. Very into Jim Morrison and Leonard Cohen, kind of these like poetic, kind of like, I guess, literary singer-songwriter types. I mean, whether or not you think Dax is on their level, you know, that's debatable, but that's kind of where he's coming from, right? He's trying to bring that kind of to extreme metal.
Yes, and I think that also leads perfectly into our next song, which I feel kind of is a bit of a sequel to the first song, although this one's definitely, I would say, a little bit more literal in... Anyways, I'm sorry, the track is Tranquilized, and...
Tranquilized, yeah.
I think it's a very literal meaning here. Like it's a song about being numb from like drug addiction or from like being like hungover or just etc. There's a lot of that like lyrical motif going on here.
So Acid Bath are a very, probably more than a lot of metal bands, I would say, a very druggy band. A lot of psychedelic kind of elements to their music, but also they did a lot of drugs. The phrase acid bath doesn't refer to like a body dissolved in acid. It refers to LSD. Tranquilized is cool. Acid Baths have a few different modes they work in on this album. Even though they're referred to as a sludge metal band, they do think they mix it up a little bit more than some of their peers. Because of course the Blue, the first track, is very sludgy. Tranquilized is, for Acid Bath, is pretty fast. Almost sounds like something you could have heard on like rock radio at the time, you know. It's kind of mid-tempo, has almost kind of a wah-wah, like Hendrixy guitar, you know. Like it's got a little bit of groove to it, you know.
No, 100% totally. And once again, I think that leads perfectly into the next song here, which is also the shortest song in the album, Cheap Vodka. And even though this isn't my favorite song, I love it. Absolutely fucking love it. Just love how short it is, how just like, it's basically like a punk song. It's basically like a punk song here.
So it absolutely is. One of the big influences, so what you'll hear people say about Acid Bath a lot is that they took elements of hardcore punk. I would argue that they weren't so much influenced by hardcore in general. They were influenced by Black Flag. They don't sound ever to me like hardcore, but they do sound at pretty much all moments like they were really into Black Flag. Cheap Vodka is the fastest and shortest song on the album. It's also Dax going mostly all in on the harsh vocals. Dax tries to mix up his vocals. He does some hard, like when he's screaming, he almost reminds me of Phil Anselmo. When he sings, though, he's like a very crooner thing. You can tell he's pulling from a lot of things. Mark Bolan and David Bowie. He's also a big Roy Orbison fan. And I think he does a pretty good job of incorporating those in an organic way into like extreme metal. But Cheap Vodka basically is, to me, the Black Flag song. Even in its lyrical themes, it's about a guy who, down on his luck, maybe he got fired, he had some sort of traumatic ending, blew the last of his money on cheap vodka, and he's going to go out on a shooting spree and, you know, suicide by cop. It's a very Black Flag-esque lyrical.
I was literally just about to say, that's the most Black Flag fucking motif for a song I can imagine. Very Family Man. Just even the cover of the loan.
Yeah. Another cool thing about Acid Bath that I think you see on that song is I think the bass is given a lot more room to breathe than in a lot of metal. That's because of Audie, who was a great bass player, very low end. But again, like most members of Acid Bath, nice mix of heaviness and melody. But you really get some great bass playing from him on Cheap Vodka.
Yes, and talk about murder, spree, and killing. That once again leads into Finger Paintings of the Insane. Now, this is a song, I'm assuming, about a murderous pedophile. Is that what the lyrics are? Because I certainly hear some motifs of that in here.
There's definitely, there's murderous themes in pretty much every Acid Bath song, right? Literally. I know what you mean with the pedo thing. I think that this is a good example of Dax kind of doing a word salad thing. And he is, like, especially at this age, he was like an edgelord guy, trying to be poetic and edgy. I think that this song is mostly, it's more about, like, the tone. You're thinking of the line, thoughts of dead babies wiped away with my semen, right?
Well, I also see kitty porn lover with a mouth for disease.
Yeah, I think there's definitely like a very dark psychosexual element to this. I don't know if Dax was specifically thinking that it's about pedophilia. I think when he was writing it, he might have just been doing some weirdo dark word association thing.
You know what I think might be, though, too, is that there's a lot of just other, I guess, for lack of a better word, degenerate, psychosexual elements. So I think he's just throwing it kind of like a dartboard, and that was just the one that stuck out to me.
Exactly.
I've been listening to a lot of Predators I've Caught recently, the Chris Hansen podcast.
Oh,
yeah. So maybe that's why.
No, I think you're right. And I want to get ahead of this criticism if anyone listening has it. If someone told me that they think Dax's lyrics are try-hard or that they're pretentious or that they're, especially in this era, I think he tightens up his lyrical style after Acid Bath. But if someone told me the lyrics on the Kite String Pop, they were like, hey, this is too edgy and kind of nonsense for me. I don't feel that way. I love Dax's lyrics. I think he's a genius. But I would understand why someone said that to me.
I mean, the thing is, though, is that, like, they were in their early 20s when they made this. I think this is actually fairly thought out for quote-unquote edgelord content, to be honest with you. I don't think it's
I think so.
Yeah, because, I can tell you what, when I was this age, my edgelord shit was way less thought out. Although, obviously, I'm not an artist on the level of Dax Riggs or any of the other guys in this band.
No, I had the same experience. I did listen to a lot of Dax Riggs interviews this week. And one of the things that every interviewer says, and I listened to interviews with him over the years, he says, so he's very soft-spoken. He has a very light great voice. And every interviewer said, oh, I'm surprised because, people see you as this menacing, kind of scary, evil guy, but you're really soft spoken and gentle. And he would say things like, well, I don't know, it's just kind of, I like to write about dark things to get that energy up. But, I'm mostly just, I don't wish that upon anyone. And he seems really confused that people have this like scary image of him. He just seems like this laid back Southern guy that likes like rock music and like blues and shit. But I think kind of getting out of the way, as you said, degeneracy of a lot of the lyrics on this album is probably appropriate given the song we are leading into, which is Jezebel.
So honestly, I don't know if I would say it's my single favorite, but this was like the first one where I'm like, holy shit, this is the shit. I love this song. I love the intro. The lyrics are great. The instrumentation is, I would say, some of the strongest on the entire album. This is a great fucking song. This is my top 3, I would say, favorite songs in the album.
Yeah, for me too. So this song is a really good example of Sammy Pierre duet brings into Acid Bath. Before Acid Bath, Dax and Audie, and I think also their original rhythm guitarist, were in a band called Golgotha. Golgotha pretty clearly is proto-Acid Bath in a lot of ways, but it's very Metallica influenced. It's weird Dax lyrics, but not quite on the level of darkness that he'd get to it here. But it sounds kind of like a theatrical rocker kid who's into David Bowie singing in a Metallica-influenced thrash band. Sammy, though, he was into black metal, and he was into death metal. He was into like that more extreme end. He's into grindcore. And it seems like he really introduced Audie and Dax to that. And also, anytime you hear black metal vocals on an Acid Bath song, that's Sam. That classic, like, howling black metal sound, Sam does that like no other, which is why he later formed Goatwhore. Jezebel, musically, is basically like a death metal song. Really pummeling blast beats, there's tempo shifts, kind of like hypnotic slow parts that speed up on a dime. Probably the heaviest song on the album, musically, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say definitely so. And also, this song introduces the most, I would say, overwhelming motif is the pro-life message of Acid Bath. The very pro-life message of Acid Bath.
So the thing is that there's a guy on Genius that insists that Acid Bath are a pro-life band. And he can't stop talking about it. And I just think, like, I mean, there's so much word salad going on in Dax's lyrics that to take, like, I guess the phrase abortion, well, the phrase ice pick abortion does come up a couple of times. And of course, well, in Scream of the Butterfly, there's a pretty noticeable one. But I think it's all imagistic illusions. I actually feel almost as bad when I say the actual themes of Jezebel, which are, I think, about BDSM that escalates into murder, and in the act of murder, both parties, the victim and the killer, feel such a deep sublimity and like connection with God that it's almost like a hallucinogenic experience.
Yes. And well, you said Scream of the Butterfly, so that's the next song on here. And honestly, Brian, is it intentional that it almost kind of sounds like the song Iron Butterfly a little bit on like the vocals?
Dax is definitely into stuff like that. Like, he definitely is into bands like Iron Butterfly. I think, so first of all, this is Acid Bath's most famous song. Pretty iconic song. It's also a ballad. It's one of 2 ballads on this album. I never thought of the Iron Butterfly thing, but Dax definitely is into guys like, I think his name was Doug, the singer for Iron Butterfly. He's definitely into Jim Morrison. And of course, Scream of the Butterfly is a Doors lyric. It's a phrase Jim liked to use. And musically, it's very acoustic bluesy. It's very like Lynyrd Skynyrd kind of. That's what I think of whenever they do these ballads. It's kind of like, it's like these weird black metal guys that found a way to like reconcile Southern rock into their sound, you know?
And you were talking about the abortion thing. There's another abortion reference in here. As we said, the most pro-life, anti-choice band of all time.
And my enemy on Genius keeps trying to rewrite all of Acid Bath's lyrics to be about how abortion is a murder. But I would say, well, there's definitely a reference to abortion in the lyrics to Scream of the Butterfly, which is like, just to get it out of the way. Their imagistic response is like, he's being a little edgy, but they're not like political statements. But I would say that
they didn't strike me as that at all.
Well, so Scream of the Butterfly is one of these Dax songs where there's definitely some literal allusions, but then there's also a lot of like imagistic things, a lot of metaphorical things, and it's hard to tell if there's any realistic meaning. This is definitely about some idealized image of a woman who meets some kind of horrible end. And it's unclear whether our narrator feels sympathy for her and misses her, or if he is the one who perpetrated the horrible end. Starts off very slow and kind of hypnotic, and sort of this this meditation on this woman's existence and kind of this inner pain she feels. That's another thing with Dax, is he'll talk a lot about kind of like anguish and like feeling empty in these same songs where he's talking about like this physical violence. And so it kind of muddies the water on like how literal it is, which I would say I think is an intentional choice, but others might find it, messy or unclear. But the actual phrase that you're alluding to, that this guy in Genius was really obsessed with, saying made them a pro-life band, was the lyric, "Something cold is forced inside her, a tear spills down her cheek, stillborn songs of a dead dreamer, hymns of the needle freak." I gotta say, there's a lot more going on. If you want to take those lyrics literally, there's a lot more going on than just, oh, it's a pro-life song.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, Brian. Breed baby. That's all that matter. That's what they're like cavemen. Like anti-choice people are like fucking cavemen with that shit.
unless it's them, they don't want to have that kid.
No, 100%.
They just want to make sure she has to have it. This is a pretty long song, right? Is it like 6.5 minutes?
Yes, I believe it is technically the longest song in the album by a single second. It is 6 minutes and 14 seconds long.
I think the other longest song, right, is the other ballad on the album. This song's cool. It's at no point musically heavy. Like we said, it's a ballad. It's mostly acoustic, and when there is an electric guitar, it's kind of a psychedelic, kind of like Pink Floyd-esque lead guitar. But it is like one of the bleakest songs on the album, I'd say. It's kind of hypnotic, and it kind of climaxes, and also like the lyrics are a fucking downer. Like there's references to pretty extreme violence in them. There's references to self-harm. There's also, again, like a lot of it's hard to tell how much of this is metaphorical and is about like some sort of mental pain or depression, and how much is literally about someone going through these horrible things. And like with a lot of Dax's lyrics, when we talk about them being pretty bleak, when you hear them in context, it's a little different, because you're like, oh, this is like a heavy metal band and they write fucked up shit. But like there are lyrics on this album that I wouldn't like recite, right? Do you know what I mean?
No, exactly. But you talk about ballad. Oh, sorry. You're talking about, coarse, very bleak lyrics. I think the next song here, Dr. Seuss is Dead, is bleak, but in a different way. I feel like this one's definitely a little bit less maybe literal in the type of violence that it portrays, and it seems more metaphorical. So what I got from this, and to be fair, I got it before I even read the annotation here, but it seems to me it's about like the death of influence and creativity in this song versus like literal violence, which is the last couple songs we just talked about.
Yeah. No, Dax has said many times that Dr. Seuss is Dead is about the death of creativity. It is about like kind of complacency and modernity and everything kind of being churned out and industry formed, and just kind of like people not having any connection to their surroundings, like any will to make anything or create anything. Pretty standard stuff for a rock and roll band, but I think he expresses it pretty well, particularly given that it still sounds pretty dark. Like he still has some creepy phrases here, but I think this song is to me very similar to Finger Paintings of the Insane musically. It's this kind of easterny kind of bass line that kind of builds into a weird kind of psych drone, and Dax kind of like crooning and screaming over it. But that's absolutely true. Dax has said that several times in the interviews. This song is about the death of creativity and kind of like the lack of inspiration and modernity.
No, 100%. And you know what? Speaking of, I think that leads into the next one here, which is Dope Fiend, which is similar to Cheap Vodka to a certain extent, but it's not nearly as violent from what I remember.
Yeah,
there's another literal, very bleak song too. It's more of a guy who gets high to get high, basically. It doesn't seem very fun, and like the shitty existence that he lives through is, I think, told very lyrically through here.
Yeah. So Dope Fiend, musically, I'd say pretty similar to The Blue. Like I said, people will call Acid Bath a sludge metal band, and they're one of the definitive sludge metal bands. But there are, like, I'd say The Blue and Dope Fiend those are like very sludgy songs. If someone asked you what sludge metal was, you could probably show them Dope Fiend as an example, which makes sense. It's slow, it's kind of like in shambles, it's messy, it's kind of plodding along and feels on the brink of death, probably like a heroin addict. The guys in Acid Bath did a lot of drugs. I don't think any of them did heroin. Judging by the way that Dax writes this, I'm assuming he's not speaking from first-hand experience. It sounds fucking miserable, to be honest. I know that, Dax said, I think the other is they were really into acid. They were really into other hallucinogens. I know, like, because they're a sludge metal band, so they smoked a lot of, like, marijuana. I also like how this song culminates in him doing an almost like Eddie Vedder, Lane Staley kind of anthemic voice and saying, yeah, motherfucker, I'm high and thankful just to be alive. Like, it's almost like celebratory. Like, you almost forget for a second what the song's about.
Yeah, no, totally. Definitely the dichotomy between, obviously, his feelings and what he's singing about, of course, obviously.
Yeah.
But speaking of things that are also very euphoric here, the next song on here is Tubabo Kumi, I think is how it's said. It's the only
Tubabo
one that
Kumi.
is like...
I think I'm pronouncing that right. I think we're saying that right. Tubabo Kumi.
Yes, and this was the only song that had a music video.
Isn't that
that
weird? Like, just of all the songs to me, it's weird they picked this one, right?
Yes, because even though I do like it, I would say it's probably in my top five for this album. It's definitely not the best song in the album. I think I would say pretty definitively.
Well, and it's like to me, I guess. So first of all, it's Babu Kume, I guess, is a mistranslation of Land of the White Cannibals. So I think Dax thought to Babu Kume meant Land of the White Cannibals. Apparently, though, it does not. He didn't quite get it right. So Acid Bath have a pretty distinct sound, and I think it's represented in every track on this album. But this song it reminds me of Tranquilized. It's a little faster, and I guess it is a little bit more like mainstream sounding, but it's kind of to me one of the less memorable songs on the album.
That's the thing. You're right. I do think it sounds a bit more mainstreamy than a lot of the others. I mean, obviously, "Scream of the Butterfly" was definitely not going to get a music video. Let's be clear here.
No, yeah.
Even though it's arguably the best song in the album, or at least one of the best songs in the album, it 100% wasn't going to get a music video. But
there are
right.
Just things in that song that you can't say on the radio.
Yes, although to be fair, there's definitely some lyrics in here, like "I'm gonna fuck the hole in Kennedy's head. Let's shoot the president,
so cool.
Rape the queen." By the way, Brian, do you think that fucking what was the reason? Was that the fucking
the reason? And the reason is you? Hoobastank?
The reason is me. No, I'm thinking about what the fuck was that Dead Kennedy? Not Dead Kennedys. Oh my god, the Misfits song. The Misfits song about Kennedy. Bullet. What was that song called?
Bullet. Where it like turns into a sexual fantasy about Jackie O towards the end.
Yes. I was thinking Texas is the reason, but that's a band, and also the reason is a Hoobastank song.
Texas is the reason are named after the
Misfits song for sure, yeah.
But yeah, so this is the only song that got a music video. I think they did actually intend for "Scream of the Butterfly" and "Bones of Baby Dolls," which are the two ballads, to maybe get played on the radio. Rotten Records, because those are two of the songs they sent out on their radio edits EP that I was talking about, the one with the Ramirez illustration. No, it's a cool song. The thing is, if you've made it this far into the album and you're digging it, I feel like there's not a track on here that'll throw you off. Well, you'll be like, well, I don't like that. Well, like if you're this far in and you like it, and I do think, and I can't stress this enough, I love Dax's lyrics and his vocals, but I understand why some people, including people that are into extreme metal, might not. They might think it's too grungy. He is trying to be like a Jim Morrison type and be really poetic,
Well, and that's the thing, though, is that a lot of the grunge guys, especially Eddie Vedder and Lane Staley to a certain extent, were extremely influenced by Jim Morrison's singing style.
Right.
So
yeah, exactly.
He was just an incredibly influential vocalist. I don't know what to tell you.
I don't think it was that Dax was trying to fit in with the grunge guys. I think he just happened to like some of the music that they liked, like Black Flag and especially The Doors.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. And then, well, speaking of songs that I think are a little bit more memorable for me specifically than this one. God Machine. Now, God Machine, to be honest with you, Brian, I think this is the kind of, I guess I'm getting the interpretation of anti-religious lyrics that I think Ali kind of failed to do. Yeah, I would say so. Well, that's the thing, Brian. I think this song is more about abortion than I'm fucking around. But no, the song's definitely an anti-religious song. I would say, Ali, you failed in a lot of ways on Sempiternal, but Dax did a pretty good job here, because I think this is, talk about angry and transgressive, like, this is the type of stuff that if you're going to make anti-religious lyrics in a song, they should be like. You know what I mean? Instead of you're stupid for believing in something.
Well, there's that, and then I guess the other route is you can be like a band like Bad Religion and give these really articulate, like, political criticism. But, like, for me, this song is so angry. Dax has talked about this song particularly, and he's kind of said, like, he considers himself kind of a spiritual person. He has a big interest in spirituality and the ideas of an afterlife. And one of the things he says, he's like, hey, where we grew up, which is, we all say from Louisiana, I guess they're from a town a little bit outside of Louisiana, was this, like, intensely Catholic area, like oppressively Catholic that they grew up around. And so it's kind of like that he's coming from. And he talks about, like, not just like the Catholic guilt thing, but also like knowing that like priests have like molested your friends and things, and that they're like these pillars in your community and shit like that. So as like a young person, that's I guess where Dax is coming from with this song.
The town specifically where they're from is either called Homa or Huma. It's like probably like an hour outside New Orleans. It's south of New Orleans. So it's like in the real boonies of fucking Louisiana.
It's like the mountain. What there it is to New Orleans, what mountain was to Green Bay.
Although even less, because instead of mountains, which of course Mountain Wisconsin is very mountainous and just rugged, like that part of Louisiana is just all swampland and shit. Like the elevation is like probably negative 10 fucking feet below sea level.
That is cool though, that they really were from the fucking swamps. Like, so they weren't like kind of playing it up like, oh, we're from Louisiana, you know what I mean? This is another contender for like my favorite song on the album. I really like this one. But it's also another one where I think you can hear a lot of influence from Sam, because obviously there's a lot of Dax Dax in this. He gets a spoken word poetry intro to the song. Should also point out the song opens with, before Dax does his spoken word poetry thing, with a sample from an episode of the Jerry Springer Show. Some cool samples in this, but also very aggro, like a lot of kind of allusions to death metal and to hardcore punk in this song, similar to Jezebel. And Sammy gets to do a lot of kind of, I don't know if you want to say harmonizing with Dax, where as Dax is singing, Sam gets to kind of echo him in his black metal voice. So on a pretty aggro album, one of the more aggro songs, one of the things that's kind of funny to me is, so I kind of mentioned how I think the overriding theme of this album and Acid Bath and Dax at this time is he writes from the perspective of like very damaged and bad people about kind of how these degenerate acts, like oftentimes murder, but drug abuse or like I guess sexual abuse or whatever, can for like these like psychopaths, whatever, like when they commit these acts, especially murder, that it gives them a transcendent kind of godlike feeling, like it separates them from like their consciousness. Like that's kind of like the perspective that Dax is going on. And even in this song, which is, kind of a socio-political song, I guess not, it still escalates to him raving about like very graphically murdering people. Talks about strangling people, their eyes bleeding, slitting their throats, shooting them in the stomach. He can't help himself. The man is angry.
Yes. Well, Brian, I think that leads perfectly into our next angry song here, which is Mortician's Flame. And this song, just like every song in this album, is about abortion. I'm going to stop genuinely, but like half the songs on here are like, yep, the song's about abortion. I'm like, who the fuck is this loser who keeps putting the annotations?
And I gotta say to listeners, like, I don't know Dax's politics. All I was able to find were him saying some stuff about rich people being bad. And then also in like 2008 to like 2010, he was talking about how he was excited that Obama was president. That's all I could find about Dax politically. But Mortician's Flame is interesting because it's one of 3 songs that were originally by Golgotha. And if you listen to the Golgotha demo, like I said, it's very thrashy. The guitars are actually a little bit, they're a little more traditional. They're kind of sharp and squealing. But I think that when this became an Acid Bath song, it slowed down considerably. And it basically becomes another kind of hypnotic sludgy song. There are some parts where it picks up, but this is kind of like Acid Bath going back to the pocket, right? They're like let's do an Acid Bath kind of heavy sludge banger. Like, there's the tracks where they experiment, and then there's ones where they fall back, and I think what they know they're really good at. Also, a relatively, not a short track, but for Dax, it's pretty short. Like, his songs are often very
It's 4
wordy,
minutes long, yeah.
But
it's about 4 minutes long.
For him, lyrically, I mean, it's not quite as dense as some of the other songs. I think he just repeats, it's like a long verse that he repeats a couple times, which is, interesting. Maybe he just didn't have as much to say about, the music.
Well, speaking of songs I don't really have anything to say about, so the next one is What Color is Death? And to be honest with you, Brian, this is the only one I think at all that I'm like, I don't remember the song at all. I'm going to be honest.
This is one of the least popular songs by Acid Bath amongst the fan base. I like What Color is Death. I love this album. It does have one of my favorite moments. It has a great moment on the album, which is Dax screaming sex and sex and sex and death, which if anyone knows anything about me and the types of music I like, it's just very cool to me. This is similar to like Tababu Kume and like Cheap Vodka. It's faster. It's kind of more thoroughly hardcore punk influenced. Again, this is kind of, you can really hear a lot of Black Flag in here, a lot of kind of wah-wah guitars. It's just a cool, pretty fast, pretty thrashy, punky, heavy rock song.
Yeah, the only note I had in here is I love the solo, but I guess I must not have loved it enough because I don't remember it. I'm going to be...
It's pretty cool. It's pretty... You know what it's like? And I'm sure Sammy wasn't thinking of this when he...
And to be clear, all the solos on this album are great. All the solos on this album are great.
Yeah, the solo on What Color is Death, it makes sense that it would stand out to you. It reminds me... It's a little bit like Tom Morello. Kind of funky.
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, I'll have to re-listen to that one specifically because for whatever reason, I just can't remember anything about the specific song. But
there's not that much to say about it. It's an Acid Bath song, a faster Acid Bath song.
No, totally. And then, well, speaking of things to actually remember, though, so the penultimate song here, as we were talking earlier, is The Bones of Baby Dolls. And this is a great ballad. Love the soft instrumental. I love Dax's clean vocals. He's a really good clean vocalist.
He is a really strong vocalist. So, and I'm a fan of a decent amount of Marilyn Manson's music. Not him as a person, but like his music. I think he wrote some good songs. But sometimes when you can tell he's channeling David Bowie, it sounds a little cartoonish, I feel like Dax, though, kind of, he really seems to have studied Bowie as a vocalist and similar singers and really like kind of trained to get closer to that level. This is another contender for my favorite song on the album. I would say this is even less of a metal song than Scream of the Butterfly. It's very folky. It's almost like a folk song or a country song. I also think that this song is more linear. It's more narrative in its themes than most of the others. This is a story from the perspective of like a child serial killer. I think we are basically followed through in this very sad, bleak sounding kind of country type. Again, Leonard Cohen is another person that this kind of reminds me of, an early Leonard Cohen song. But so we open it on, our narrator watching these children play. He's kind of like stalking around and planning on killing them. There's a phrase in the song that comes out a couple times, which is, "I heard her screaming like a radio." My read on that line is that he hears this child scream at him, but it's like she's not there. It's like some abstract noise. It's not coming from another human being to him. Like that. Mary Lou left marks on you. She just screams at the walls. Pretty chilling lyrics. Of course, the kid that probably scratched or bit him, left marks on you. She just screams at the walls is another line that really gets me because it makes me feel like, I think this is about a kid who's been kind of separated and isolated and is now screaming, but there's no one there except for our narrator, Then we get the phrase, leading up to that, she just screams at the wall. The kite string pops, swallowed whole by the sky.
The title drop.
The title drop. And I really think here that Dax had this fascination. And Dax seems like a very sweet, gentle guy who just likes creepy stuff. He likes horror movies. He likes dark. He does like dark superhero comics like Sandman and, Swamp Thing and shit like that. He likes Alan Moore. But I think he just is interested in like dark subject matter. And I think it's like themed throughout this album. And that's why I'm not sure if I believe that Rotten Records forced them to have the album cover. It's like, what would it be like to be like a sadist, to be like a killer? What would it be like to feel those feelings and perceive the world they rule? And the thing that he keeps coming back to on Scream of the Butterfly, on Jezebel, on Bones of the Baby Dolls, even on Tranquilize, those things that could be read as up, is the idea that in this act of like profound and like awful violence, you achieve like almost like a nirvana, like a psychedelic experience. You feel bigger and stronger, and then as the moment fades and the act is done, you feel empty and bored, and you feel nothing again. The song refrains with the phrase, "Everything's gone dry like bottle glass scraping across the pavement," which is a beautiful line. I think sometimes Dax's like attempts at poetry can be a little silly, but sometimes like when he hits, he really does sound to me like a poet. And I think "Everything's gone dry like bottle glass scraping across the pavement" is a really beautiful phrase.
And guess what? We all know what that fucking sounds like too.
Yeah, it kind of brings you back to a moment, especially, like this hot, dead summer day when you're like a kid and everything sucks and nothing's going on. You hear like the sound of this scraping sound. Yeah, it captures a moment, I think.
No, absolutely. And you know what? I think that leads perfectly into our final song here, which is Cassie Eats Cockroaches. Now, I read somewhere that Slipknot was very influenced by Acid Bath, especially on their first, I shouldn't say the first, because their first album was Make Me Kill Repeat. I don't care what the fuck they say, that was their first album. But their self-titled album, which of course was their 1999 album, there is a lot of influence on that album that I hear specifically in this song, for fucking sure. Like the samples, like just and to be fair, this is throughout all the album, but Dax's like very distorted screaming sounds like Corey's distorted screaming, especially on songs like Purity and stuff like that. Like there is no fucking way that Slipknot weren't influenced by Acid Bath. And obviously that's true. They've said they have been, but I really fucking hear it on this song, especially.
Until like this last couple of weeks when we were talking about this, because, listeners might know, I was anti-nu metal for the most part. Taylor got me into nu metal at the time when we were roommates. So he like got me to listen to Slipknot, and I really liked that self-titled album, but I don't think that stood out to me at the time. But when you said that, I was like, oh shit. It's very apparent. I will also say about 2 years ago, Slipknot recorded a song called Acidic, which Corey intended specifically as an Acid Bath tribute, I guess. And you can tell, like I wouldn't say you can tell, like obviously it still sounds like Slipknot, but if you know that as an Acid Bath fan and you hear that song Acidic, you're like, oh yeah, that's it. This is interesting to me because this is like Acid Bath's version of like a sex anthem, right? This is like a horny Acid Bath song.
Which is funny because, and just like how a last song should be, this is the culmination of just kind of I shouldn't say everything, but a lot of the lyrical motifs on this album.
Yeah.
The song begins with a quote from Clockwork Orange, which is, of course, an extremely sexually violent movie. And then there's a snippet from Blue Velvet. And then the song basically ends with him raping a woman to death. Or I should say, maybe kills her and then he rapes her body. And that's like the end of the song. And it's very wild.
It's unclear clear what exactly is happening. To
Or
me,
he could be a cannibal
seeing-
too, because there's definitely talk about eating things as
yeah,
well, and like
of
a bug
consuming
eating
someone.
things.
Yeah. So this is another example. Clearly, at some point, this song takes a violent turn. There's also things in here that indicate that our narrator might be doing something consensual. There are some lyrics here that I think that I actually have seen people on the internet take as literal that I do not think are literal. There are lyrics like, I came to fuck the open wound, so hold it open wide, which I've seen people on like music discussion boards say they think is a literal thing. I don't think so. I think that's just a gross and dark way to talk about sex.
Well, that's the thing, Brian.
Not
It's
to...
called a gash, Brian.
a slit.
Fucking,
Or like the
my
phrase,
fucking axe wound girlfriend. No, I'm just kidding.
like what's the phrase? I left Cassie hollow, cut you with my cock. I'm not sure if that's literal, but I will say that after that verse, then we get our Blue Velvet kind of like industrial sampling thing where it samples various lines from Blue Velvet out of sequence as the music kind of speeds up and gets buck wild, and then it kind of reaches this mid-tempo stomp, and Dax kind of still not Dax, our narrator. I don't mean to conflate that Dax wants to do these things, but this kind of idea of like living in this like kind of nirvana, this heavenly state with this person who he's, probably just killed, definitely just had sex with, and it's maybe just killed based on your interpretation of the lyrics. Like he's imagining transcending life after this intense sexual and probably violent experience. And he's like, oh, we'll be like reunited there. It's very strange. It's very bleak. Yeah,
I also
cool
love the last
phrases
verse here. Slide across the warm red floor to meet me. Lock the bathroom door before they crawl to eat me. Cut her throat and whisper that we're going home. Twitching to the cold dance, they suck the meat from her bones. Suck, suck, suck. And that's how the album ends.
I was literally going to recite that exact same verse starting
yeah.
at Slide Across the Warm Red Floor because that's so good. But yeah, so that's Acid Bath's version of a sex song. Pretty
Makes
erotic.
me fucking horny, I'm going to be honest. I'm hard.
I'll tell you,
I
just orgasmed all over the fucking computer.
Yeah. All right, but yeah, so that is the track listing here. And do we have any final thoughts before we get to our pluggables? Or I should say overall thoughts as well.
This is my favorite metal album of all time. I would say the lyrical content, again, is pretty extreme, but I will say I think it is more thoughtful and done with more purpose and more taste than like, who's that horrible death metal band that has the really sexist and like violent lyrics? They did that album Nature of Man or something. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I was going to say, until you said the album name, I'm like, Brian, that does not narrow it down very much. I'm going to be
I know.
I don't know
like,
which band they're talking about, but
I'll send you a link about it so you can read some of these. So like in extreme metal, obviously a big part of it's to be transgressive, to be edgy, to be antisocial, and there's some pretty awful stuff. I think Dax writes with a lot more purpose and kind of he is interested in dark themes, but to me it feels more like you're reading like a horror writer or someone who's like exploring motifs and concepts. I don't think it's just he is kind of basking in like the degeneracy of it on this album. I don't want to say he's not, but I think there is a little more purpose to it. I also think musically, this could kind of intersect for a lot of people. I think like if you're into like a certain type of black metal or death metal, I think there's probably a lot here, especially instrumentally, that you could like. But also like if you're into Alice in Chains, like let's say you're a fan of Alice in Chains or like Pantera and you want something just a little bit darker, like this might do it for you. I also think like, I don't know, like I was kind of like an artsy like rock nerd when I found, I liked metal and I liked hardcore and all this stuff, but like what I think I really hit to me about this was how it was so heavy, but that it was so kind of glam rock and so kind of theatrical, So I think that if you can get past the lyrical content, this album could probably pull in a lot of different types of audiences. But I do think the lyrical content probably keeps a certain number of people from engaging with it.
No, totally. And I think I'm going to basically go off of all the points you had because I was at least familiar with the name. Of course, I was familiar with the album art. Like, that's the thing I've seen for probably fucking years now and just never listened to it because, to be honest with you, I didn't know what to expect from it. Just because from the album, like, art itself, I thought it might have been like a fucking porno grind album.
Well, yeah, that could suck. No, that could
yeah,
suck.
It could just be shitty, yeah. But
that shit sucks.
It's terrible.
And I'm like an overgrown like edgelord to be in my taste in like metal and punk music. That shit sucks. It's fucking for losers.
No, 100%. But I'm totally glad I listened to this. When I first listened to it, I remember liking it, but I remember not really thinking a lot about it. And then re-listening to this tonight just before recording it and looking at more of the lyrics, I'm like, oh, now I get it. Now I get it. I'm like, okay, I see the influence. I see why people would love this. And to be fair, I liked it from the beginning. I want to be clear here. I don't think there's a single shitty song in the album, but I didn't really get it until I re-listened to it. And I'm like, oh, now I really fucking get it. And you know what this really reminds me of, though, Brian, in a lot of ways? And I mean this in the least insulting way possible.
Yeah.
This, to me, reminds me of if, like, metal hipsters who just think that, like, Cannibal Corpse is just a little too shitty and goofy, and they want to get something a little bit more thoughtful and well thought out with their lyrics.
I think that's literally kind of the thing. Because, like, okay, so Acid Bath broke up when Audie died. The reason for that is because Audie needed to be there to, like, translate, like, Dax's weird kind of artsy ideas to, like, Sammy, right? Like, that's what they all say. There wasn't, like, any ill will. It was, like, Audie was the person who could link this, like, extreme metal thing with, like, this kind of, like, try not to use this word, but it's a good one in this case, like, hipstery kind of, like, Dax is a guy who would say, he probably said in the metal scene, I don't even really like metal. You probably annoyed everyone saying that. It's also, I do think, even though I said the lyrics to this could be a big barrier for a lot of people, the lyrics were a big part of this album when I got into it. This is a band, I read their lyrics a lot when I listened along to it. I would also write their lyrics in my notebooks. Like I said, I was like an edgy, weird kid. It's a very distinct lyrical style, and Dax continued to evolve that as he himself developed. The second Acid Bath album is so different. There's still some heavy songs on there, but it's them expanding on the Stream of the Butterfly, Bones of Baby Dolls kind of songwriting thing, doing like this heavy but more atmospheric and kind of psychedelic and kind of some country twang. And then after Acid Bath breaks up, Dax starts Agents of Oblivion, which is like full-on like metal 70s glam, like full-on Mark Bolan meets heavy metal. And then he basically is like refining that and doing like kind of a glam singer-songwriter thing, which he's doing to this day. He has a new album coming out soon. But for one brief moment, he was able to kind of correspond that with these guys that were into, Cannibal Corpse and fucking probably Napalm Death and shit like that.
You mentioned those bands, Brian. Of course, we can't forget that, once again, as I mentioned earlier, Slipknot was very influenced by this. And even though a lot of the guys in Slipknot did love, things like fucking Napalm Death and, Cannibal Corpse and all that, they later took this band and they were influenced by Acid Bath, and then they influenced a bunch of bands in the future. So it's like a daisy chain of bands that were influenced by Acid Bath. So I think it, once again, makes sense that they were at fucking, what was the music festival?
Sick New World.
Sick New World. Yep, that's Sick New World, yeah.
And so Acid Bath have also become really big on TikTok. I'm not sure why, but a clip from one of their songs became a TikTok meme, which was huge for them,
Which one was it?
God Machine, I think.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Did you choose this episode because fucking Can You Feel My Heart from Sempiternal was a meme and now this one's a meme on TikTok, Brian?
I didn't pick it because of that, but when you said that, I was like, oh, we both did meme songs then. I think it was God Machine.
Yeah. All right. But yeah, with that out of the way, I think we should get to our pluggables and then get to our final thoughts and obviously our send-offs. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well as always, please subscribe and follow us on both our Spotify and our YouTube channel, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. Of course, our good friends Scott, Sean, Robert are creating a fantastic series. They got episode 1 out. It's on YouTube, but they need more financial and moral support to get the rest of the other 9 episodes in their 10 total episode series running. So please donate to them. We put the link always in the YouTube video and our Spotify description as well. And as always, of course, we always say, just, send us an email, send us proof that you donated, and within reason, we will match your donation as always. That promise will probably continue forever, if we're being honest with you.
Yeah, I think we can both more than afford if it happens randomly, that $25 or whatever. It's not, and we're just going to keep doing it in perpetuity at this point. So please follow the Facebook page, Millennials Are Old. Also follow Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and Threads. Threads is pretty fun. It's fun because you can make a post and people just fucking find it. But especially if you want to send me cringe generational content, it doesn't have to be Millennials. It could be a cringe Zoomer would be really fun. We haven't done a lot of Zoomers on here. A cringe Boomer, a cringe Coomer. Send it my way. I'm always looking for more cringe content because the most cringe content I see is my own and I need to diversify.
Same, honestly. Like, everything that I love is cringe, and I don't get it. Like, everyone's like, Taylor, why do you like this? It's so cringe. And I'm like, yeah, that's what everybody said about the 100 other things I fucking like.
And then 5 years later, everyone's like, actually, that thing was cool. And you're like, I fucking know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, fucking totally. Yeah. It's one of those things where, as always, we are cringe. The things we like are cringe, but eventually we will be vindicated. That is always the truth. We will always be fucking
Yeah.
vindicated.
Look, I mean, this is a thing that like soy losers say, but it is true. You don't kill the part of yourself that's cringe. You need to kill the part that cringes.
Yeah,
That
it's
is
like
a real thing to some extent.
kill the cringe inside your head.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll get further in life that way. I promise
No,
you.
100%, 100%. But speaking of things that are very cringy, Brian, I am going to fall asleep and cringe because I almost killed myself working out the other week and I'm still a little sore from it. So I'm going to
Ooh.
cringe falling asleep. It's fun.
I
It's
have a
great.
question. You didn't hurt your shoulder by chance, did you?
No, I was trying to squat and I don't know if my leg buckled or whatever, and I fell over and I almost
Oof.
killed myself. It was so bad,
The,
dude.
the only reason I ask is because I did something to my shoulder last week, and I was like, maybe we were having like a moment.
You know what I think it was, Brian? I think it was carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Okay,
Yeah,
that was cringe.
Yep.
That was cringe.
That was pretty fucking millennial coded.
You're a badass bitch, motherfucking cunt, twat, waffle.
I'm a bad motherfucker, and I'm gonna fucking I don't fucking know, man.
I'm gonna
I'm the
fuck
man,
this
the myth.
shithole of a world.
The man, the myth, the legend, and like a mustache on me.
Yeah, it's
Like a
like, oh my
twirly
god,
mustache.
holy shit! It's the man Brian walks in, and you're just walking in like, hey guys.
Hey, what's up? Epic.
Yeah. Oh God. But yeah,
No,
so we're gonna be cringe millennials and fall asleep. I think that is the thing that we always try to go for, is that we're tired old cringe millennials and we're
I need
badass
to-
boss bitches.
I turned 33 this month. I need to go to sleep so I can dream of meeting my own precious Derpina. My own sweet 35-year-old Derpina.
I can has a retirement plan. Okay, that's bad.
I can has meaning in life.
Speaking of meeting, have a good night, everybody. We're gonna have a meeting in sleep.